just going to give it a minute to make sure everything's up and running and everything works well. If someone could, or just hopefully you can all hear us, and we'll have someone double checking that in a moment. And we're going to get started once a few more people roll in. Okay, great. So everything seems to be working well. We're going to start off. Yoma's going to talk about a couple of the changes that have happened to make sure you're up to date on everything Deca Ontario going on.
All right, thank you, Matt. So to start off, all of the events this year will be sectioned. On top 10 people or competitors from each category will qualify for ICDC, and there will be 10 categories per judge. So that's probably the biggest change for provincials this year. And now we're both going to be talking about a couple of our general tips for both written and role play events.
Right, to start off, I'm going to be talking about writtens, and the biggest advice I can give for writtens is getting it done early. So the due date is January 15th, and please do get your writtens done before then and try to submit them before then, because almost every single year there are technical difficulties. There's a flood of emails and people saying, I couldn't submit, the website's down, something's gone wrong. Any problems like that, we are very strict on that deadline. So please do get your written done before that deadline, upload a copy, and make sure you're all prepared, because if you leave it to the last minute, you're going to run into problems. It's almost for sure. The other thing is, once your written's all done and completed, and if you get it completed a little bit earlier, you can have even more time for this, you need to have a strong script and presentation, because it makes up a lot of your marks. 60 of your marks are based upon that presentation. So, sorry, 40 of your marks are based on the presentation, 60 are based on the written. So it's really important that you have a strong presentation and work on that script as much as you can. Don't make it robotic, but make sure it's memorized and professional.
All right, so moving on to role play tips. For provincials, you don't know your instructional areas, unlike regionals, so it's really important to be prepared for anything. So make sure you do your research on all of the instructional areas. And I know that January, February is a really busy time. So if you can't look at all of them, at least pick out the ones you don't know and try to do as much research on them as possible. Also, to really stand out, you have to know that you know what's going on in the industry that you're going to be presenting about. So for example, I'm in hotel lodging and management, so do make sure that you know everything you can about the major companies in your category, and also make sure that you know about all the new events coming up, any changes or trends that you can potentially use in your case study. As for exams, they are a really important component to qualifying for ICDC, so you want to, of course, aim for around above an 85, which with practice is definitely doable. So again, since that time is really busy, make sure that from now you're starting to do around 10 to 20 multiple choice questions per day, and a little bit every day really adds up. And don't make sure you're not just doing the questions, also make sure to record the ones that you're doing wrong. Make sure you note down any words or concepts that you're not necessarily familiar with. Now, doing that, they will definitely show up, if not in the same question, in different questions and different contexts. So make sure that you're really familiar with what they are, and that's really going to help you in the end. So that's all of our general tips, and we're going to be moving on to answering some of the questions you guys submitted through the Google form. So the first question is, if you don't know one of your PIs, how do you prep accordingly and present it? So you do have the opportunity to see all of your performance indicators beforehand on the cluster performance indicators list. So again, we do highly encourage that you study all of those beforehand and take notes on the ones you don't know, so that doesn't really arise. And also this really helps because when you're preparing, you will already know everything for your performance indicators, and you can really focus on the creative aspect of your case. In the case that the situation does arise, make sure to really break down the performance indicator and try to see what it's asking. So focus on the keywords in it. So for example, if you don't know what the nature of a promotional plan is, break it down. Like, what is promotion? What's promotional plan? What sort of strategies or promotional strategies can you use in this plan? And that's really going to help you sort of formulate your answer for this specific PI.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be answering the next question. I also want to throw out, it was a bit of a slow week this week. There's not a ton of questions that got submitted. I think everyone's a little tired coming back from regionals, having just competed. So if you have any questions that you didn't submit to the Google form, feel free to put them in the chat here, and we're going to be looking at those once we've gone through all the questions that we have already. So the question that I got was what font size and what font size and what font is okay to use for writtens, and what is the line spacing writtens. So Arial regular font size 11 is the standard size that standard font and standard size you should be using for your writtens. And then there's been a change this year. You might have already heard about this. Writtens used to have to be double spaced. Now they can be single spaced, and probably should be single spaced because lots of the page limits have been reduced. So it's going to be a little bit tighter fitting everything in there. So single spaced is allowed now.
All right, and so the next question is, how do I differentiate myself from the rest of the competitors, and how can I be creative apart from business cards and quotes? So in any presentation, no matter what role you're playing, it's really important to have fun with it and be as enthusiastic as possible. If you're having fun, the judge is going to have fun, and they're going to be listening to so many presentations, so you really want to make sure that you have that one presentation that can really lighten up their day. It's also really important to get into character. Now, no matter what your character is, you have to ensure that you are being professional, but you're also playing the role. So for example, if I was a waitress and I had a customer, I would make sure to add little things like, I hope you enjoy your meal at our restaurant at the end, to show that I'm really getting into character. In contrast, if I was an employee talking to my boss, I would be a little bit more professional. And if my judge was a colleague, I would be a little bit more relaxed, but still keeping a professional boundary. That really shows the judge that you know your role and you know what you're talking about. Visuals are also really, really important. Now, not every case is a type of case where you can make a poster or necessarily a social media post, but I always find that roadmaps really, really help, especially when you have a super complicated plan. It really helps the judge follow along. In addition, with 5 PIs for individual orals and around 7 for teams and 4 for principals, it's really easy to get caught up in trying to put in as much information as you can for the performance indicators. So it's really important that you keep your information for that as clear and concise as possible. And you also want to make sure that anything that you want to expand on for your specific performance indicator should relate to your case. So for example, if you're talking about product utilities, there's form, place, and there's like around 4 of them. So make sure that you state them all so the judge knows that you know them, but really dive into the 2 that really relate to your case. And again, make sure to use as much real life information as possible. So for example, if you're supposed to make a new pricing strategy, you have the opportunity to do as much research beforehand on other companies and their pricing strategies. So as well, make sure that you try to incorporate them and say, for example, the Marriott Hotel uses this pricing strategy, which has been really effective, but for our specific case, we can change it around a little to help us even more. One of my last tips would definitely be to spend around a quarter, 3/4 of your time actually writing and coming up with a solution, and at least the last 2 to 3 minutes reviewing all of your information. This review period really helps you enhance your presentation because it helps you retain more information and you go in a lot more confident.
Okay, great. So the next question was, I'm participating in FCE, and I was wondering what I need to submit for the written report. Does it need to be a formal report, or general research notes are enough? And so this is a question we get pretty often, and it's the same for FCE, HTTPS, and PSE. All 3 of those professional selling events have the same kind of structure and guideline. And the official answer is you do not need to submit a formal report, but we do want to see research notes, PowerPoint slides, any handouts, basically the stuff you're going to be using, because it is 100% presentation, so there is no report there. But as Deca Ontario, we want you to submit that online just so we can see what you're doing, have some research notes and some PowerPoint slides to see what you're doing.
Right. So the next question is, what does it take to be a provincial officer? Does being on Innovators Council increase your chances of becoming an officer? So to be an officer, we don't necessarily only look at your competitive achievements. We do want to see that anyone who applies is super dedicated and has shown passion and commitment to Deca throughout, and they've really done something different with their Deca experience. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean a competitive advantage, although that will help in certain cases. So as for your qualifications, you want to make sure that you have a strong academic average. It does get really, really busy, so we want to make sure that you're able to balance schoolwork and extracurriculars. We also want to make sure that you have a diverse amount of experiences depending on what position you're applying for. So if you're going for media coordinator, we want to know that you have some experience with making videos, creating posts, and different media techniques. And as for that, again, showing your passion and how passionate you are about Deca is definitely one of the most important things we look for. So the next question is it true that only people who are presidents of their school's Deca chapter become provincial officers? No, it's not true. You don't have to have been a president, and you also don't actually have to have been a chapter executive. I know I wasn't a chapter exec before I got this position, and a lot of us also weren't chapter presidents or chapter execs. So again, we really look at how passionate you are about Deca. And the next question is, do I have to get top 10 at ICDC to become a provincial officer? No, you do not. We don't necessarily look at your competitive achievements as a cutoff for the position. It's great to see, but that's not one of the determining factors.
Right, and continuing on with more questions about provincial officers, and I think it's really great that we're seeing this much engagement. For the people that are interested, it's great to see you're getting interested this early in the process and asking these kinds of questions. So what do they look at when they're deciding who should be a provincial officer? So it's difficult for me to say because we don't have the application for this year. It does change a little bit year to year and what they actually include in the application. But last year, and it usually follows the kind of general same format, there's an essay talking about what you want to do in Deca, what you think you can bring to Deca. They want to hear about your extracurriculars. They want a transcript to see your schoolwork. And then once you get past that preliminary level, once you've submitted that application, they shortlist to a group that they interview. And you have to answer different standard types of interview questions and really show that you're passionate and excited about Deca and you'd be a good fit for the role. Following that, we have another person really wants to be a provincial officer, and they're asking what they can do to increase their chances. And so Vioma's already touched on a lot of the great things you can do. The biggest recommendation I can give is to find a way to lead. As much as you can, find a way to show that you are a strong and confident leader, whether it's helping out as a chapter executive at your school and initiating exciting events at your school, or even outside of Deca doing things with math clubs or with sports teams or anywhere you can find a bit of a way to lead, work in a team, and really show the skills that they need in a Deca provincial officer. Show what you could have done in the past that shows that you'll be a good provincial officer and support Deca Ontario and help do great things for Deca Ontario. Can really help out in your application. And then the final question was, will the raw exam and oral scores from each region be posted? And the answer is yes. Not an exact date set on that, but it should be sometime soon that information will be posted.
All right,
Okay.
so now moving on to some of the questions that you guys left in the comments. Again, as we're talking, do feel free to leave some more questions. So the first one is, will there be sectioning at Provincials this year? Yes, there will be sectioning at Provincials. There will be 10 sections, and top 10 or top competitor from each section will make it to ICDC. Now, the next one is, can you elaborate on what sectioning means? Is it top 2 per judge for both writtens and orals? So sectioning basically means that you're competing against everyone who is in the same judge group as you and who's being judged by the same judge. And this essentially makes it a lot more objective because different judges have different marking styles. And in this way, you really ensure that we're being fair. So since there are 10 judges per categories and 10 qualifiers, the top 1 overall score per section will make it to ICDC. And as for the next one, do you recommend presenting your oral in a roadmap structure or an essay structure? Now, this really depends on your case. I would personally always go with a roadmap structure just because in terms of an essay structure, that's really set out. But and it seems a little bit more natural if you did in a roadmap structure because you're organizing your ideas in a way that you see best. So you don't necessarily have to do topic 1, topic 2, topic 3. It gives you a lot of leeway in how you want to organize it to best suit your case.
Okay, and there's actually one more question there, Vioma, about sectioning. You kind of touched on already, but just in case there's anything missed, can you elaborate on what sectioning means? Is it top 2 per judge for both writtens and orals?
All right, so again, it is top competitor per judge because there are 10 sections and there are 10 judges per category. And again, this basically means you're competing against everyone in your specific section, and everyone in your section will have the exact same judges. So this just makes it a lot more objective because different judges have different marking strategies. And so if you're competing against everyone in the same judge group, that makes it a lot more fair. So again, it will be top 1 overall score per judge, which is per section.
Great. And to answer the next question, why do different written events take different amount of people to Prov? So IMCS took about 105, IMCE took about 56. And the reason for that is just to do with the cutoffs and to do with the number of students that signed up for those categories. So sometimes there's some categories that just have lower registration rates. And also there is the minimum cutoff of 50% on the exam. So sometimes that cutoff isn't always made, and that can lead to lower registration in certain categories. But the follow-up question was, does that affect the amount of qualifiers each event? And no, it does not. It'll still be 10 qualifiers per event that go on to ICDC. And the next question actually is another written question asking about the FCE. So in regards to the FCE question, if I had to submit my research notes, does that mean I have to present that to my judge on the day of the competition, or can I present a PowerPoint instead? So to answer that, it is your PowerPoint that you'll be presenting. The research notes are only there so that Deca Ontario can make sure you're not plagiarizing any work and that you're actually going to. We have some trouble some years where students sign up for categories and then don't show up or don't prepare well enough, and that's part of the reason we have that. We have you submit your notes before, so we see that you're doing work and you're prepared ahead of time, and also to make sure there's no troubles with plagiarism there. So no, you don't have to present those research notes to your judge. Your presentation can be designed around your PowerPoint or whatever visuals you may have to really show off to the judge.
All right, and the next question is, between partners, what should the maximum difference be between average exam scores? So it's sort of hard to put a specific number on that, but I would recommend try to be within like a 10-point range, just because if it's any more than that, it's sort of hard to average. It might either be pulled down a lot or pulled up a lot. So, try to keep that 10-point range.
Okay, and I think that's the last of our questions. So at this point, we'll leave it for another few minutes here while we're just kind of wrapping things up. And if you have any last questions, please put them into the chat now. Actually, I just saw one pop up. So because there isn't QSRM, will more people qualify for RFSM? Sorry. And Vioma, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So yes, more people will qualify for RFSM. It's the same concept as last year. So I believe 8 competitors for RFSM made it to ICDC for RFSM, but the next 9 to 16 made it to QSRM. So it's the same concept this year.
Great. And the next question was, does my judge see the research notes? This is again for the FCE, HTPS, and PSE, the professional selling categories, or only Deca Ontario sees? So your judge will not see those research notes. It's a plagiarism check for Deca Ontario, and you're not marked on those research notes. It's just a check to make sure that you've prepared and that and that there's no troubles with plagiarism. So it's not part of your mark at all, and you won't be judged on it at all. And the next question was, what was the reasoning behind switching to sectioning? Doesn't this create the possibility of having multiple previous ICDC qualifiers in one section? And Vioma, I think I can take this one. So the reasoning behind it was we believe it's a more fair way of having our students compete and choosing which competitors should move on to the next level. It does remove the judge's bias, where if one judge believes in giving hundreds but another judge doesn't, then that bias won't affect competitors as much because they're sectioned per their judge. So to answer your question, though, there is a possibility that there could be multiple ICDC qualifiers from the past year all under the same section, which would be unfortunate, but the chance of that happening because all of the sections are randomized is very low. So it is a trade-off. There's no perfect system to decide which qualifiers move on besides having them all seen by one judge, but that would be too time consuming. So we think this is the best system to decide who should move on. Although it's not a perfect system, the chance of a situation like that happening is very low, and we believe it won't happen this year.
And just to add on to that, it is the exact same way as it's done at ICDC. So it's fairly similar in that way. And it again just does make the process so much more fair because you're not, you don't have that judge bias. So if anyone has any more questions, we will be on for a few more minutes. So please do let us know in the comments.
Okay, so we did just get a question here. Because there's so much to learn when preparing for the exam, what is the best way to prepare for it? Study the material that will be on the exam or complete practice exams? And Vilma, you've had a lot of experience with the exams, so.
Mhm. So there is a lot to learn when prepping for exams. So it's important to study the material and complete practice ones. So while you complete practice ones, make sure that you're not just doing as many practice exams as possible. With 2 months left for provincials, do make sure that after every exam, you look through it and filter through the exam to figure out if there's anything you don't necessarily know. So it's really a bit of both, and you want to do both to get the best results. Practicing will only get you so far, and studying the material will also only get you so far. So, with so much time on hand, it's important to do a bit of both.
Okay, and the next question was asking about the finance cluster exams online, and apparently there are two documents that are saying different dates. It's possible one of these documents is from the last year, and that's why the different dates. So if you could just message either Vilma or me, will double check on that date. I don't know the date offhand, but we can double check and confirm whether it is February 4th or February 9th that the finance cluster exam will be happening.
Oh, and just to answer the RFSM question, yes, it will be top two per judge who qualify from RFSM. And then the second overall will go to QSRM.
Okay, so we actually have someone that just looked into the Deca Ontario website and checked exactly when the day was for that finance cluster exam, so I can actually answer that now. It is February 4th this year, or if there happens to be a snow day on that day, it'll be February 5th. Oh, and we got a couple more questions here. So, do you have any recommendations in regards to ensuring your chapter members are prepared for provincials as a chapter executive? So, I can speak to that a little bit in terms of preparing. It's impossible to make sure that they'll be perfectly prepared, but the best you can do is making sure they're preparing early. So it's good that you're asking now. There's still about 2 months until we get to provincial. So making sure there's consistent practice. It's impossible, especially in role play categories and in written categories, to cram everything in right before provincials. So consistent long-term practice really is what will get them there. And also trying to host fun, as a chapter executive, trying to host fun meetings where students do want to come out and do want to continue practicing and doing those cases and doing those exams. It's really important having that social aspect there around it. It can be often very important to keeping students engaged over a long time and having them practiced and prepared for provincials.
And moving on to the next question, what would happen if people were to choose not to go to ICDC after qualifying? How would the next qualifier be determined, especially with sectioning? So, again, with sectioning, the top overall score in each section will move on to ICDC. If the top overall score chooses not to go from each section, the second top overall score from that section will be chosen to go to ICDC. And as for the next one, with respect to an oral role play, how would I present my information without making it seem like I'm just listing off the PI? So something I like to do is I like to make sure I don't actually explicitly state the performance indicator. I simply state a keyword within that performance indicator. So usually how I structure my role play is I start off talking about the main problem and I sort of give in a brief glimpse of my overall solution. So for example, if I'm creating a promotional plan and I have a bunch of marketing functions, promotional strategies, performance indicators, I would sort of order them from the most broad to the most specific. So, for example, if it was the nature of a promotional plan, I would just briefly talk about what a promotional plan is, why it's so effective, and say the next one was explain promotional strategies used in the hospitality industry. I would pinpoint specific ones just so that it sort of goes with the flow. I'm talking about a promotional plan and then promotional strategies as to what I can specifically do with this plan. Now, doing it this way sort of ensures that, again, you're not necessarily just listing off the PIs, but using keywords of those performance indicators in your overall solution allows the judge to know that you did touch upon them even though you didn't explicitly state them.
And I'll jump in. I'm going to answer one of the written questions here because Vioma keeps getting a bunch of roleplay questions back to back. So one of the questions submitted was, in FCE, HTPS, or PSE, those are the professional selling events, there are only 40 provincial qualifiers. So are there still going to be 10 qualifiers for ICDC, or is it less? And the answer is it will still be 10 for all categories, that there'll be 10 ICDC qualifiers.
All right, and moving on to the next one. For role plays that go into Tier 3, along with Tier 1 and 2, is it best to study all the PIs and make notes for each one, or just do practice cases and the PIs that are in them? I would definitely say go through all of them and make notes for each one, just because, especially at ICDC, they will throw in performance indicators that you've never seen on a case before, even if that specific, especially with Tier 3, even if it's a promotional case, I have seen sometimes they add in like a Tier 3, if it's promotion, they'll add in like a professional development performance indicator. And that's happened to me before at ICDC. So it's definitely better just to know all of them and be prepared. And Deca does try new things every year. So you will definitely find that you'll see performance indicators you've never seen before on practice cases. So make sure you know everything if you can.
So the next question was, are students dedicated to each judge at random, or are they sectioned from regionals? And the answer is it'll be entirely random. Deciding on which judge you are which section you're in is entirely random. And the next question was, what awards will be given at Provs? And so it's going to be very similar to the way principals events and written events were done last year, because they were done in sectioning last year. And so the way that is there'll be the top. Actually, Vioma, you have to correct me if I'm wrong here. I believe it's top 15 for the exam,
Mhm.
top 10 for Roleplay 1, top 10 for Roleplay 2, and then the top 10 provincial, or I believe we'll have top 12 overall, and then the top 10 will get plaques that'll say provincial champion. And then
It might
sorry, yes, go ahead.
This year, because there's top 10 finalists, we might actually have top 15 overall. But
Oh,
again, if you have any questions about that, just email us and we'll get back to you with exact numbers.
okay, this is great, actually. This is the most number of questions we ever got in the chat here, which is really good. So if anyone has any final questions, we're probably going to wrap it up sometime soon around 7:30. But if you have final questions, we'd like to answer them now.
All right, so yes, we are going to do a couple more of these bi-weekly up till provincials.
We're going to take one off, though, for around that the winter break, that New Year's Eve kind of time. I believe so. Yeah, it'll be bi-weekly, and then after that, we'll probably have another one sometime in January. But we'll take a little section off there for the winter break. Okay, great. So I don't think we're gonna. I think that's. Oh, actually, one final question. So for the FCE, is it just based on your presentation score, or does the exam score count too in terms of ICD's qualification? Right. So I had misspoke actually a little bit earlier. I was talking about FCE and I said it was just based off the presentation. I forgot that FCE and the other PSEs write an exam. So yes, the exam is also, I'm not sure if it's a 50-50, or you can find all that breakdown online on the Deca or on the competitive events website, or on the Deca.ca or Deca.org to see the exact breakdown. But yes, it will be a mixture of your presentation score and your exam score that will decide your ICDC qualification. And doesn't it make it unfair that many of the written Prov qualifiers were chosen by rank determined by Deca Ontario? Wouldn't it be much easier for an FCE competitor to qualify ICDC than IMCS? So yes, it is partially true that because there are less students in the FCE category than there are in the IMCS category, they have a higher percentage chance of qualifying, and that just depends on the demand per category. So some categories, there's a lot more demand, a lot more students that are interested and want to compete, and it does mean it becomes more difficult to qualify in those categories. So it's there's a bit of strategy involved in choosing categories that you both enjoy and that there is a certain amount of competition in, so it can change a little bit. And actually, our behind the scenes guy here, he has posted the link in the chat there if you're interested in looking at some of the breakdowns in terms of competitive events for scoring. I wasn't sure about the exact breakdown for FCE.
All right, so we hope you guys all found this question and answer session helpful. We wish you the best of luck for provincials. And of course, we have a lot of resources for you coming up. Make sure to check out the Deca Hub for practice exams and practice cases. And our provincial officer team also worked on a couple of training manuals in the chapter exec section. So please do make sure to check those out. Again, we will be having a couple more of these before provincials, but if you have any questions in between, feel free to reach out to us through social media or email. And thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you have a great evening.